Good morning, everybody. Good to see all of you.
Good morning, Doshi.
Hi. I'd like to share a Zen phrase that I studied, must be about at least 15 years ago now, when I was with my teacher. She shared with me a book that was all in Japanese. I couldn't understand very much of it, but I knew enough to learn how to piece together some of the kanji, and with my teacher's assistance I was able to do a feeble translation of this particular phrase that was in the book. And what's significant about this phrase book, it was published for a Japanese audience, and what's significant about it, at least as far as I'm concerned, is that my teacher's teacher, Noda Daito Roshi, whom I talked about last month when I was there, he wrote the foreword to it, or the introduction to it, or something like that. He had some part in the book itself, and so I wanted to know, like, what are some of the things that he promotes, or maybe he had some collaboration in the writing of it. But I'm not certain. It's been a while, so I don't remember exactly what his role was there, but it was some piece of this book on Zen phrases. And there's like some 80 of them. So this is just one of those phrases. And in fact, actually, I spoke about a phrase in a previous talk, maybe about a month ago. And they're fairly short, just 4 Chinese characters. In Japanese, the Japanese version of it reads, Ko-in-ya no gotoshi. And if we break down these 4 Chinese characters, they mean, the first ko means light. In means negative or obscured. Goto has to do with suchness, and shi is an arrow. So one possible translation of this phrase, a ray of light obscures suchness. A ray of light obscures suchness. I want to point out that many spiritual or religious paths explicitly hold up light as somehow better than darkness. But as you can see with this phrase, it's getting at something else. But generally in our culture, we have a bias towards light. The Buddha, for example, was enlightened, right? He wasn't endarkened. But we have a bias physically, mentally, and spiritually. So physically, who wants to go into a dark room? Who wants to go into a dark room? As soon as we enter a dark room, we don't usually do things in the dark room. We turn on the light, right? We flip a switch. We want that electricity, we want the light. Interestingly, though, at Nebraska Zen Center, we have chosen, thanks to Nonin and the tradition that he passed on to us, to not have the altar lit for the first sitting of the day. So we are sitting in darkness when we sit at Nebraska Zen Center in the early hours of the morning. So it's just something to think about. Physically, we generally, it's just, we don't think about it, but we want to go into light spaces, not dark spaces. With regarding mentally or maybe intellectually, who feels that they are better off remaining, quote unquote, in the dark about things? Right? We want to know. We want information. Right? We want knowledge. And then spiritually, certainly also, we find lots of symbolism around light and this is not to critique our spiritual heritage. It's not to critique our flipping switches on and off. It's just to show that there's another way to think about light versus darkness, right? But certainly in our spiritual heritage, if we look at the book of Genesis, the first phrase was, in the beginning there was light, right? So it's like the first line in the Bible reads that way. In the beginning there was light. And hey, who doesn't feel better when they are splashed with light when they're in a place of confusion, right? Bad things generally happen in the dark, especially when we're not paying attention, right? Or we at least, whether bad things happen or not, I guess what I'm saying is that we have the perception that bad things could happen when there's not enough light. Our fears are often tied to darkness. But Zen offers a kind of training that I think, in my experience, has been to help befriend our relationship with darkness. In the Zen poem Sando Kai, it reads, light and dark oppose one another like the front and back foot in walking. Light and dark oppose one another like the front and back foot in walking. Right? Light, you can't have light without darkness. Right? From a spiritual perspective, but from any perspective. Light only exists because of darkness. What would light be if there wasn't darkness? And thus, the front step and the back step in walking are just like light and dark. And my own teacher, she would tell me to learn how to not be dependent on light when I was doing certain priestly functions, like putting on my robe. She would say, don't look in a mirror. You should be able to do it in the darkness and come out fine. And so that way we're not dependent on mirrors. We're not looking at our image, which can also often be caught up in vanity type things. So she trained me to, feel, are your robes correct? Use your fingers to determine that, not your eyes. And the famous, I don't know if he's a neuroscientist. Now his name is escaping me. He's featured in a movie called Awakenings that stars Robin Williams. Oliver Sacks, thank you, yes, Oliver Sacks. And my teacher really loved reading his writing, Oliver Sacks, and she pointed out to me one of his writings where he talks about a blind man who he got up on the roof and fixed his gutters. And he did it when it was pitch black out in the middle of the night because it didn't make any difference to him. And so he goes on to say that sight itself is too easy, it's too facile, the facility of sight. And really, if you think about it, our eyes just love to take in forms, right? It's very easy to take in forms. It's more difficult to use the sense of hearing. I love sight just as much as anybody else does, so I'm not saying we should get rid of our eyes. I'm just saying that we have this, I don't know if it's a bias is the correct word, but we have a love of being able to see that we're often not conscious of, right? We often take for granted. We wake up in the morning, our eyes open, we see, and we start to move around, and our day proceeds through sight. But what if we had that sight removed? It's a very special thing to work with those that are without sight. And one of my Zen colleagues is a blind nun. I don't know if she'd consider herself a nun anymore, but she used to, when I was at Manakudi Zendo, she would come on occasion, maybe once every few years, and offer talks and talk about her experience. And she would often share really deep things about sight, and just being in her presence made me more aware of my own ability to see. And just how much I take it for granted. And I started I started imagining, just without even much effort, I started imagining when she was in my presence, how it would be for her to move around in the kitchen and cook. Because she was able to do it. She was able to cook, she was able to clean, she was able to walk here and there, but without sight. So we have all these other senses going for us, but they don't get as much play when we have these beautiful things called eyes. All right. My teacher, one time, I remember we were coming back from something, and it was late at night, and I was trying to get the door unlocked for my teacher, and there was no light in the hallway. For some reason, the light had gone out. So I said, I can't see. And she said, feel, feel. So she wanted me to get the right key that will go in that door and do it by feel. That was my training. And it was a tremendous gift. And traditionally, I don't know how it is these days, but it probably depends on the monastery you go to. But in Japan, oftentimes the monasteries are without a great deal of light. And certainly, and they're trying to make at least the place that I trained at Shogoji, they were trying to give the impression of what it was like to train before electricity. And not that these places didn't have electricity, not that they were trying to save money. It's just that when we are so dependent on light, there is something that gets lost, right? There's something, again, there's something beautiful and wonderful about light that comes from electricity. But we have to remember that with whatever technology that we gain, there is something lost as well. And so it's worth investigating that as Zen practitioners. You might try going into a dark bathroom and feeling around and seeing if you can figure things out. It'll open up all of your senses. You'll be much more mindful, because you have to be, right? And that's where mindfulness really shouldn't have to be so difficult to do. If you put yourself gently into a dark room, your mindfulness will increase without effort. If you can be without too much fear in the dark, right? I think that's not the thing that we often have to overcome is our fear of the dark. But also on an emotional level, Zen is about learning to embrace grief and loss. Soaki Kodo Roshi said, loss is gain. Gain is loss. And so on an emotional level too, we experience grief, we experience loss. And sometimes our spirituality, our spiritual traditions try to leap us out of those losses, that grief that we might be experiencing. And I'm not saying we should stay stuck in a grieving mentality, not at all. And I think that if we're having a hard time with negativity, negative emotions, and the key is transformation. The key is transformation of that negativity. And if we don't embrace it, right? If we don't hold it, if we don't allow it, if we don't feel it, how are you going to embrace it? How are you going to transform it? That's the symbol of Buddhism, is the lotus. The lotus comes out of the muddy water, it takes the mud and it changes it into its flowers. And this is not easy to do. This is not easy to do. We can talk about it, but then there's the doing of it. And that requires the hard work of practice, of sitting, of meditation, in part, as means to transform our suffering. And so Buddhism says, absolutely, you can change it, but you have to recognize it. First noble truth, suffering. Suffering is. So let's just recognize it in our life where it is. Number 2, there's a cause. Number 3, it can be transformed. It can be changed, right? And so we're doing a lot of different things to do that. And I've in at the year-end newsletter, I mentioned the 8 points for optimizing our Zazen. Those are all things that we can do to transform our suffering. And I think also therapists. Sometimes we need to see a therapist. Sometimes we need medicine. These are all things that can help as well. So we don't want to do this all by ourselves. We don't want to rely totally on Zazen to transform our suffering. We can also rely on others. The key is that we don't attempt to try to transform everything all by ourselves. Now, the commentary on this phrase, I'd like to share what I translated with a lot of help from my teacher, because I think it's quite deep, and it highlights also the natural world as an important piece of our practice. In fact, there are Zen ancestors that spoke passionately about our relation, our connection with other species. And that in doing so, in understanding that we actually practice with other species, we mature our understanding. That's evidence. When we see that we're practicing with other species, that's evidence of our maturing practice. But here's a bit on light and dark and how they play in the natural world, and to help orient us towards that larger context of the natural world in which we're practicing. So here it is. Light and dark is like the sun and the moon. On our planetary home is manifest the quickly spinning dynamic in one day and night. Isn't that beautiful image? The quickly spinning dynamic. Right? The earth is spinning. We're spinning on this planet, and it revolves us between darkness and light every 24 hours. Every day it's as if an arrow were released, turning round and round and going across the universe. Which is most important? This year, one day, the future? At the same time, the sun appears to be moving quickly. It also shines nonchalantly. In the same way, the moon, not standing, not confused, gives and shows its fullness and newness beautifully. In this manner, let's ride the heavenly body's rhythm like riding a wave. Let me read that again. In this manner, let's ride the heavenly body's rhythm like riding a wave. Wow. We're part of that wave, right? How do we ride the heavenly body's rhythm? We have to become perceptive and aware of it. And that, I feel, is Zazen through and through. When we really sit and we become more sensitive to our experience, we can feel, right? We can, we get a sense of the movement of things. My teacher would say, the only way for us to see how much the world moves is for us not to. Right? So in our stillness, there is movement. That's also from what we chant here at Nebraska Zen Center, Verses on the Faith in Mind, which is also an ancient Zen poem. Right? In stillness, there is movement. In movement, there is stillness. Continuing here, be careful when you're on your own not to spend time idly. Be careful when you're on your own not to spend time idly. Right? What do we do when we're alone? That's a question we can ask ourselves. How do we use our alone time? Day after day, look up at the sky when you can. Please feel, or the word could be intuit, or sense and see the rhythm of the heavenly bodies. That's what we're after. Feeling, intuiting, sensing the rhythm of the heavenly bodies. And here's a practice that you could try. Every 30 minutes, I have my phone set for a bell to ring. It's the Mindfulness Bell app from Plum Village, and I have it set every 30 minutes. A bell will ring wherever I am. And I use that bell. Sometimes I use it, Thich Nhat Hanh offered the practice of pausing. And actually in Plum Village, they pause every 15 minutes. They sound a bell every 15 minutes. And everybody pauses and breathes for 3 breaths or about, maybe 30 seconds or so. And it's a very challenging practice, especially when we're so busy doing so many different things, to stop what we're doing. And sometimes I have to say I'm not always good at it. But anyways, more recently, and especially since studying this this translation that I'm sharing here, I started thinking, I could use that mindfulness bell every 30 minutes to pause and just look up at the sky and intuit the rhythm of the heavenly bodies. You don't even have to look up at the sky. You don't even have to be outside. If you're not outside, don't go outside to do it. If you're outside, great, then you can do that. But if you're inside, then just get a sense of being on this, being a part of this planet that's turning. Right? Can you intuit the rhythm, the movement of the planet? And then the last line here is, decide what you want to do. All right, he's giving us a decision. Decide what you want to do. This is your decision. This is your choice. This is your practice. Is not for me. It's not for the Sangha. It's for you. It's your choice. It's your choice to be here. Decide what you want to do. If you say, I'm too busy, you won't see it. All right, there. That's the point, is that if we, with our constant busyness, and it's a challenge. Let me tell you, from my own reflection on this, it's very, very challenging for me to say, I'm too busy, I can't do this. But I'm working, I'll tell you, I'm a work in progress. Decision is what practice is. We decide to come to practice. All right, I'm going to offer this closing phrase for you, and then if you like comments or questions. An arrow flies across the universe. It hits the arrow of the universe. Where does it land? Meeting every moment.